Welcome to Canadian Nationalism. As we begin our journey into discovering our theories and ideas on Canadian nationalism, we will first need to understand and acknowledge what nationalism is. Firstly, we will begin with Carleton Hayes, an American educator, diplomat, and academic, additionally leading and pioneering specialists on the study of nationalism. Hayes described nationalism as a cultural group of people who speak a common language and who possess a community of historical traditions. However, first we need to distinguish the difference between nationality and nationalism. Nationality is a fact, like I am Canadian because I am from Canada, or I am American because I'm from America. But until people are conscious of nationality and make it the prime object of their patriotism, they do not produce cultural or political nationalism. Canada has roots in colonialism, and historically has rooted its identity in its relation to its colonial British and French colonizers. This identity, however, caused a split in the country. Instead of noticing their commonalities, the country noticed their linguistic differences. Although in modern-day Canada we may not notice this difference, through strife and strength, the Canadian people eventually came together. However, little do they know that the unification of our country was formed from the glorification of war. Now, back to Canada, the better of the two. The first known contact between Europeans and native Canadians occurred in the 10th century in the Arctic, Greenland, and Labrador, when the Vikings landed on Baffin Island and along the Atlantic coast. Fast forward a couple of decades later to the late 16th century, when contact between Indigenous people and European people became much more frequent. The French and British had the most contact with native Canadians. We will see later on in history that this relationship, as awful as it was, benefited both the French and the British in the end. Canadian land then was fought over for decades of years by European powers as Indigenous people faced one of the worst genocides in history. Actually, to be Canadian was to be English, sometimes French-speaking Europeans. Therefore, anything but white didn't really fit in. The War of 1812 was an armed conflict between the United States and the British Empire. The British restricted the American trade since they feared it was harmful for their war with France, and they also wanted to set up an Indian state in the Midwest in order to maintain their influence in the region. Both sides suffered many losses, and even the White House was burnt down in 1814. The War of 1812 had a powerful, invigorating influence on what Canada would have become. Indeed, had the struggle been lost, this country likely wouldn't exist. However, our country did not have to gain glorification through such horrific events. The War of 1812 provided Canada with a sense of national pride, yet an estimate of 22,000 individuals' lives were taken. Now, if you didn't pay attention in history, you're probably wondering, at what part did Canadian independence happen? Well, on July 1st, 1867, with the passage of the British North American Act, the Dominion of Canada was officially established as a self-governing entity with the British Empire. 2 years later, Canada acquired the vast possession of the Hudson's Bay Company, and within a decade the provinces of Manitoba and Prince Edward Island had joined the Canadian Federation. In 1885, the Canadian Pacific Railway was completed, making mass settlement across the vast territory of Canada possible. World War I was a war which gave Canada the opportunity to place our names on the map, fighting vigorous battles, showing the others that we are strong and gaining national pride. World War I, also known as the First World War, the Great War, or the War to End All Wars, was a global war originating in Europe that lasted from July 28, 1914 to November 11, 1918. The cause of the war still remains controversial and debated. However, the war left 17 million dead and 20 million wounded. Yet, Canada took a stand throughout the war and gained nationalism. However, can we really say national pride came from over 17 million casualties?